I recently came across this demo by Matt Perry, the creator of the motion library that uses this nice staggered grid animation. So today I thought we'd recreate this animation by setting a position-based delay for each of these grid elements. To start, I have a new Next.js project. So let's start by just creating a grid of items. So first I'm going to define the grid size. So here I'll make a constant grid size set equal to 10. So I have a 10 by 10 grid. Then I'll replace this content. I'll make a div, which will be the container. And in this container, I'll give it display grid. I'll hard code that we want 10 rows and columns. Give it width full, max width of 50 view width just to size it. We need to make sure this is a square, which will make sure that each of the items in the grid is a square shape. Gap 2, and on bigger screens, gap 3. Then inside this div, I'm going to construct an array of the right size. Array, and we'll have it size grid size squared. Map over this. And for each of these, I'll return a div that's self-closing. And on this div, I'll give it, for now, just simple background of neutral 500 and just give it a bit of a rounded border. And I need to pass in a key. I'm going to grab the index of each item in the mapping, and I'll just pass that in as the key. So we have this nice grid here of just gray rectangles. Now let's select one of these items to be our origin. And I'm going to manage this list of items based on the coordinates of the row and the column index. That will just make it easier than using the raw like X and Y position on the screen. So up here, I'll create a state variable to store the origin, set origin, and it'll be a use state. Initially, it will be empty, but that means I need to pass in a typing. And here I'm just going to pass it a array, which has 2 items, 2 numbers, in this case for the indices, the column and the row, or it's undefined. Next, I'm going to define a function that just randomly generates a coordinate and based off of the grid size. So you can see it returns an array with 2 numbers, and I just use math.random scale to the grid size to make sure we get, in this case, value from 0 to 9. And then on page load in a use effect, I would just call this and set the origin appropriately. So set origin, get random coordinate, and we'll run this on the initial page load. So we have this origin set. Now let's make it visible on the grid. So for that, I'm just going to go back to this div. I'm going to add a style tag. I'm going to set the background color. And if it's the origin, I will make it orange. And if it's not, I'll just leave it as this gray. So just to help this out, above this return, I'm going to create a Boolean is origin. And this will just check to see if the item is indeed the origin. Now for this, I need to get the row and the column. So the row will be the floor of the index divided by the grid size. And the column will be the index modded the grid size. And then its origin, simply row equals origin 0 and col equals origin 1. And then back in this background color, I'll say if his origin is true, then set this to orange, else we'll just leave the default. Okay, so this is given an error because its originally origin is undefined. And so when it first tries to run this, it will say it doesn't have a 0 in first item. So it's come back as undefined. So just to fix all this, above the return statement, I'm just going to say if origin is not defined. So if not origin, then I'm just going to return null. I'm returning early from the component altogether. So this will only make sure that this renders when origin is set. So now there we go. We have an orange square. If I refresh the page every time, there's a different value of the origin. All right, let's get some animations going now for each of these items. So I'm just going to start with a very basic animation where everything animates at the same time. So here on this div, I'm going to convert this to a motion component. Then I'm going to set some animation properties. So initial, animate, and also some transition properties. So for initial, I'm going to say for the opacity, I want to animate it from 0 to 1, but I don't want to animate the origin component. So I'm going to make all these conditional. So if this is the origin item, then with opacity 1, else start with opacity 0. I'm also going to set the scale as well. So if origin, we'll just have it by default to 1. Otherwise, we'll start a little bit scaled down. Let me just copy this to the animate since we have the same properties. But in this case, don't really need to worry about if origin because they're all going to animate to the same place, which will be, in this case, opacity will be set to 1. And scale will also be set to 1 for all of these. So now let's just try it. So if I save and refresh, there we go. Now we have this nice little scale and opacity animation that's actually pretty quick right now. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit. So in this transition, I'm going to make sure that this is a spring animation. And I'm also going to set a bit of a bounce. set to 0.5. If I refresh, okay, the bouncy animation. But now let's add the stagger. And this stagger is going to be defined by passing in a custom delay value for each of the items. So for example, I could say, for example, delay 1 right now. So we'll just delay it by 1 second and then animate everything in. But we want to customize this based on the distance between the origin and each item. So to help with that, I'm just going to define a function up here that helps us calculate this distance. The simple get distance function, which takes in the row and the column that we're trying to get distance from to the origin. And just simple Cartesian distance, x squared plus y squared. And then I'm just scaling it in this case down based on the grid size, just so we don't get these crazy high distance values. So now down here, I can get the distance and pass that in as a custom delay. So I'm going to make a delay object directly, and I'll say we want to get the distance from the row and column of this item to the origin. We want to multiply it by some sort of base delay that we'll define. So let's just go up here and I'll just create a base delay. Let's set it to 0.5 by default. And now I'm just going to use this delay here in the motion prop. Now let's try it, refresh the page. There we go. We have this nice distance-based stagger. So as you get further and further out, there's more of a delay. And you might also notice, if you're really paying close attention, there's this nice shimmer effect that seems to happen. And this is coming from the fact that we have a spring animation with a bounce. So the opacity is overshooting a little bit on the animation. And so that's leading to this shimmer that nicely radially goes out from the origin point. If we want to make this a little bit more pronounced, if we, let's say, animate these to 0.8 instead, so we really see that bounce to the opacity, I refresh it, you can see it a little bit better. Now, as a final touch, we can also add a bit of noise to this delay to make it a little bit more interesting. I'm just going to go up here and define a very small noise amount, like 0.05. And then on this delay, we'll just add some randomness here. So I'm going to say plus mat.random, which will give us a value from 0 to 1, times this noise amount. So this will add some random perturbations in the delay. So now it becomes a bit more interesting. It's not just a straight animation every single time. Obviously, if we want to make this more pronounced, I could really up the ante here, make it like 0.25 the noise, and then you'll see much more randomness come in. But we still want to maintain that rough correlation with the distance. So shrink it and still interesting, but still maintains that core animation. That's it for this one. The source code is linked in the description if you want to check it out. YouTube thinks you should check out this video next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.